Whether essentially Turkey satisfies the left.
Many people, I can tell you, many people.
And maybe the only person
that the F-35 used
is like, we cannot afford
of it. During a bilateral meeting in Ankara, on the edge of a NATO summit, Trump told the world that he is seriously weighing the sale of F-35 fighter jets to Turkey, and that he is prepared to lift the sanctions Washington slapped on Ankara years ago. He said it calmly, almost casually, standing beside Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, as if a congressional ban written into American law were a minor detail rather than a wall. So how does a sitting American president promise one of the most advanced warplanes on the planet to a country that his own government legally barred from touching it?
You know, people here would say, what's the potential downside of selling weapons to a very close ally of the United States? And the answer would have been probably not much. Decision makers
And what does that mean for NATO, for Russia, and for the fragile balance of power stretching from Washington to Ankara to the Middle East? Stay with me, because the story behind this single sentence is far bigger than a plane. Let me set the scene for you, because the setting matters almost as much as the words. Trump traveled to Turkey this week for a NATO summit, and while he was there, he sat down with Erdogan for a face-to-face meeting. Reporters did what reporters do, and they pressed him on the question everyone in the room already had in their heads. Would he really sell Turkey the F-35, the fifth-generation fighter that Ankara has wanted for the better part of a decade? Trump did not dodge it. He called the F-35 the best plane by far, and he said that selling it to Turkey was certainly something his administration would consider. He framed it as a natural reward for a partner he clearly admires. In his own words, he described Turkey as more loyal, in many ways, than other countries that Washington simply assumes will be loyal. That is the tone I want you to hold on to as we go deeper, because it explains a great deal about why this is happening now. To understand why this is such a shock to so many people in Washington, you have to rewind to Trump's own first term, because he is the one who built the wall he is now trying to walk around. Back in 2019, Turkey went ahead and purchased the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, a powerful piece of military hardware designed to track and target aircraft. The United States had spent a long time warning Ankara not to do it. American officials had urged Erdogan to buy the American Patriot system instead, and they laid out a simple logic. You cannot operate a Russian radar and targeting network in the same fleet, in the same country, as the most secretive stealth fighter the West has ever fielded. The fear was, and still is, that the S-400, sitting on Turkish territory, could quietly learn the F-35's secrets, its radar signature, the very stealth features that make it so hard to detect. So Trump, in his first term, pulled Turkey out of the F-35 program entirely. He was the author of that decision. Then Congress went a step further and turned that decision into something much harder to undo. Lawmakers passed sanctions on Turkey under a law known as the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, a piece of legislation that punishes countries for buying major military equipment from Russia. That same restriction was written directly into the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual law that funds and shapes the American military. A specific section of that law explicitly prohibits transferring the F-35 to Turkey as long as the Russian system remains in Ankara's hands. This is the part I really need you to sit with. This is not a policy memo, not an executive preference, not a temporary order that a new president can wipe away with a signature. It is federal law, passed by the people's representatives, and that is exactly why Trump's comments in Ankara landed like a thunderclap. So the obvious question becomes, can he even do this? Can an American president simply reverse a ban that his own Congress codified into law? And the honest answer is that it is complicated, and it is contested. There is a mechanism buried in the law that offers a narrow path. The administration can issue a waiver, but only by certifying to lawmakers that Turkey no longer possesses the Russian equipment that triggered the ban in the first place. In plain terms, before Turkey can be handed the keys to the F-35, someone in the American government has to look Congress in the eye and confirm that the S-400 is gone, or at least neutralized. And that is where this whole thing gets tangled, because it remains genuinely unclear what would happen to Turkey's stockpile of Russian missiles under any deal that Trump might strike. Nobody has spelled out whether Ankara would hand the system over, mothball it, or transfer it somewhere else. Now, there is a version of this where the president tries to move ahead, regardless of how Congress feels, and that possibility is very much on the table. Since the start of his second term, Trump has made a habit of pushing through foreign and domestic decisions without waiting for lawmakers to sign off. That pattern is exactly why so many people took his Ankara comments so seriously. When he says his administration will soon decide whether to sell the F-35 to Turkey, the people who wrote the ban are not treating it as idle talk. They are treating it as a warning that the president may try to steer around them. And when he was asked directly whether he had any worries about all of this, whether he was concerned about the Russian system, about the risk to the technology, about the pushback, his answer was almost dismissive.
Back into the fold here, it has to, there are laws preventing that. So knowing that, how realistic do you think it is that Turkey is going to be let back in?
He said he had no concerns about anything having to do with Turkey. No concerns at all. Trump's reasoning, when you strip it down, is deeply personal and deeply strategic at the same time. He keeps coming back to his relationship with Erdogan, and he does not hide it. He described the bond between the two countries as being better now than it has ever been, better even than during his first 4 years in office, which is saying something given how warmly he spoke of that era. He praised Erdogan directly, calling him a leader who has made his country stronger and more powerful. And he tied the potential F-35 sale to Turkey's willingness to support American military efforts in the Middle East. In Trump's telling, this is loyalty being rewarded. Turkey stood with Washington, in his view, when others hesitated. And the F-35 is the prize that comes with being a reliable partner. Whether you find that reasoning persuasive or reckless, it is the engine driving the whole decision, and you cannot understand the story without it. But here is where the picture gets far more complicated, because Trump is not operating in a vacuum, and the resistance to this plan is loud, bipartisan, and coming from directions you might not expect. Just days before he spoke in Ankara, a group of 10 lawmakers, 6 Republicans and 4 Democrats, sent a letter directly to the president. Think about that combination for a moment. In a Washington that agrees on almost nothing, members of both parties put their names on the same page to say the same thing. They wrote that they had deep concern about any effort to sell the F-35 to Turkey. They pointed to Erdogan's posture toward America's closest partners, and they pointed to Turkey's defense relationships with countries that Washington considers adversaries. Their conclusion was blunt. It is not, in their judgment, in the best interest of the United States to hand Turkey this aircraft. When the opposition to a president's plan unites his own party with the other side, that is not background noise. That is a signal. The concern from lawmakers is not only political, it is technical, and it goes to the very heart of what makes the F-35 special. The whole value of this fighter is its stealth, its ability to slip past radar, to see without being seen. That advantage is a closely guarded secret, and it is exactly the kind of secret that a Russian air defense system is designed to unravel. The worry that keeps surfacing in Washington is that if Turkey operates both the F-35 and the S-400, or if that Russian technology is anywhere near the plane, then Moscow could gain a window into the aircraft's most sensitive capabilities. And once you understand that the S-400's entire purpose is to detect and target aircraft, you start to see why critics describe the combination as letting an adversary study the free world's best fighter up close. Some voices in Washington have warned that pairing the two systems would effectively give Russia, and potentially China, insight into technology that the United States has spent enormous sums keeping hidden. And it is not only Americans raising their hands here. One of the most striking objections came from Israel, and specifically from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. His relationship with Trump had already grown rocky in recent weeks, and he chose this moment to make his opposition public. Netanyahu argued that Turkey should not be given the F-35, and he did not stop at the plane. He said Turkey should not receive the engines for its fighter jets either. His reasoning was about the balance of power in the Middle East, a balance that he insists rests on Israeli air superiority and on America's military posture in the region. In his view, putting the F-35 into Turkish hands would tilt that balance in a way that threatens Israel's edge in the skies. So now you have a picture where a president is promising a warplane to one ally, while another ally is publicly begging him not to. That is the tightrope Trump is walking in Ankara. Let me pull back for a moment and show you that this F-35 conversation is not happening in isolation. It is the latest and largest move in a whole series of gestures the administration has already made toward Turkey. Washington has already given its blessing for the sale of F-110 fighter jet engines to Turkey, and those engines matter because Ankara wants them to power its own domestically built fighter, a jet it has been developing to reduce its dependence on foreign hardware. On top of that, the administration wrapped up a major legal case against one of Turkey's largest banks, a case that centered on accusations that the bank helped Turkey get around American sanctions on Iran. That case concluded with far lighter consequences than many expected. When you line up the engines, the softened legal case, and now the F-35 signal, a clear pattern emerges. This is a deliberate, step-by-step warming of relations, and the F-35 sits at the very top of that ladder. Behind the scenes, the machinery of the administration has been turning on this for a while, and Trump has not been acting alone.
Partner has the biggest military. You'd probably say the U.S. But if I were to ask you, who has the second biggest? Would you say Germany? Poland? The UK?
His cabinet has been pulled into it. He has spoken about working with his Secretary of State, his Treasury Secretary, and his Defense Secretary to figure out the path to lifting sanctions on Turkey. The Pentagon has reportedly been reviewing how a sale could actually be structured, examining what would need to be certified in order to stay within the boundaries of American law. The vice president signaled that this review was underway, describing a process where certain conditions have to be confirmed as met before anything can move forward. And through it all, Trump's message stayed consistent and confident. When the legal complications came up, his response was essentially that his team would work it out. That phrase, "we will work it out," tells you everything about how he sees the obstacles. He does not see them as walls, he sees them as details. Now, not everyone in Congress is opposed, and I want to give you the full picture rather than only one side of it. There are voices, including within the president's own party, who see potential upside here. One senator described the prospect of lifting the ban as good news, framing it through the lens of the alliance.
F-14 is back to a close ally of the United States, back when before the Islamic Republic became the essential government of Iran, right?
His logic was straightforward. If the president and his team have genuinely resolved the concerns about the Russian system, then the result would be one more NATO country flying the F-35, one more ally with a top-tier fighter in its fleet. From that angle, bringing Turkey back into the fold strengthens the alliance and puts a powerful aircraft in the hands of a partner on NATO's strategically vital southeastern flank. That is a real argument, and it is worth taking seriously. The disagreement in Washington is not simply between those who like Turkey and those who do not. It is between those who trust that the S-400 problem can be solved and those who believe the risk is too great to accept on faith. For his part, Erdogan has every reason to feel optimistic after this week. Turkey has wanted back into the F-35 program for years, ever since it was pushed out. Ankara had originally been a partner in the program, even helping to produce parts of the aircraft before the Russian purchase severed that relationship. Getting the F-35 would be a significant boost to Turkey's air power and a powerful symbol of restored trust with Washington. And Erdogan has made no secret of his hope for a positive outcome from these talks. So, when Trump stood beside him and called the plane the best by far, and called Turkey loyal, and said a sale was something he would consider, those were the exact words the Turkish side had been waiting to hear.
To be kept in the fold for the benefit of the geopolitical power relationship.
So is Turkey an important ally? Yes, but we still haven't.
From Ankara's perspective, this trip may go down as a turning point, the moment when the door that had been slammed shut in 2019 finally started to creak back open. Trump himself waved away the central worry that has driven this entire debate for years. When he was pressed on whether the Russian air defense system posed a problem, whether Moscow might glean information about the F-35 stealth and its ability to evade radar, he simply did not engage with the fear. He said he had no concerns about anything having to do with the relationship. And this is really the crux of the divide. The critics see the S-400 as a fundamental, technical, almost mechanical problem that no amount of goodwill can erase, because a radar is a radar, and it does what it is built to do.
What I'm seeing out there seems to suggest Trump is being reckless in suddenly looking for a way to loop Turkey back into the F-35 program.
Trump sees it as a matter of trust between leaders, something that a strong relationship can manage. Those are two completely different ways of understanding the same situation, and the gap between them is exactly why this story is so contested and so consequential. Let me widen the lens one more time, because what is really at stake here goes beyond one plane and one country. This is about how the United States manages its alliances and about who gets to decide. The tension between a president and Congress over foreign policy is one of the oldest struggles in American government, and this F-35 question puts it on full display. Congress wrote a law specifically to prevent this sale. The president is now standing on foreign soil, suggesting he may find a way around it. However this ends, it will say something important about where the power to make these decisions truly lives, and it will send a message to every other country watching. A message about whether American commitments and American restrictions can shift with the mood and the relationships of whoever occupies the office. That is a much larger question than the fate of a single fighter jet, and it is the question that will linger long after this summit ends. There is also the Russia dimension, which hangs over everything. The entire origin of this dispute traces back to Turkey buying Russian hardware, and the entire fear from critics traces back to what Russia might learn if the two systems coexist. So in a strange way, this is a story about Russia as much as it is about Turkey. Bringing Turkey back into the F-35 program while the S-400 question remains unresolved would, in the eyes of skeptics, hand Moscow a strategic gift. It would let a rival power potentially study the West's most advanced fighters.
To hear that, because I think it's important, as I ask you to unpack for us the significance then of Donald Trump sort of going back on...
Supporters counter that pulling Turkey firmly back toward NATO and away from Moscow is worth the effort, and that a Turkey flying American jets is a Turkey less likely to lean further toward Russia over time. Both of those arguments are real, and both are on the table right now as this decision hangs in the balance. So, where does all of this leave us, and what should you actually watch for next? The most important thing is that nothing is final yet. Trump has signaled his intent, he has expressed his willingness, he has praised the plane and praised the partnership, but he has not completed a deal, and the legal barriers remain firmly in place. The real test will come in the certification. If the administration wants to move forward legally, it has to satisfy the conditions written into American law, and that means addressing the fate of the S-400 head-on. Watch for how Congress responds, because the bipartisan resistance we have already seen could grow, and lawmakers have tools to push back. Watch for whether Israel's objections harden or soften, and watch for any sign of what Turkey is actually willing to give up in exchange for the aircraft it has wanted for so long. The answers to those questions will determine whether this Ankara moment becomes a genuine policy reversal or simply a memorable line delivered at a summit. What I find most remarkable about this whole story is how it captures the way modern power really works. Through relationships, through symbolism, through a handshake between two leaders that can suddenly outweigh years of careful legal restriction. In one meeting, in one exchange with reporters, Trump reframed a settled question into an open one. He took a ban that he himself created and Congress reinforced, and he treated it as negotiable. Whether that is bold statesmanship or an overreach of presidential power depends entirely on where you stand, and honestly, reasonable people are landing on very different sides of that line right now. What is not in dispute is that the conversation has fundamentally changed. The F-35, once firmly off the table for Turkey, is now back in play, and the whole world is watching to see what happens next. And that is where I will leave the story for today, with the door in Ankara now open and no one quite sure how far it will swing. This is a fast-moving situation, and the picture could shift again with the next statement, the next letter from Congress, or the next move from the administration. Thank you so much for watching our coverage on Trump's push to sell F-35 fighter jets to Turkey despite the congressional ban. If this breakdown helped you make sense of what is really going on between Washington and Ankara, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next update as this story develops. Your support is what keeps this coverage going, and I would love to have you back for the next one. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and I will see you in the next report.